An unprecedented show of solidarity as thousands of people turn out in Paris just days after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. The French Prime Minister says his country is at war with terrorism and radical Islam. But does France need to look within itself for solutions? This is Inside Story. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. The attacks on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and later a kosher grocery store are for many French people a watershed moment, widely described as a blow to France's republican values of liberty, equality and fraternity. The bloody events that unfolded in Paris have prompted intense reflection and debate in France and beyond. On Sunday, those debates were supported by a show of national unity. French President François Hollande was joined by leaders from around the world, and among the thousands of people who took to the streets were Muslim, Jewish and Catholic groups. Ahead of that march, France's Interior Minister said he had met with his European counterparts and agreed to increase cooperation to stop these kind of attacks from happening again.
We have agreed to increase our cooperation in the fight against terrorism. We must first of all deal with the work under the Commission to strengthen, with unchanged European laws, the control of European nationals within the Union. We're all in agreement indeed to apply greater controls on the basis of objective criteria in full compliance to ensure the fluidity of cross-border traffic.
Well, some in France wonder what the long-term consequences of the attack will be. There's already been an increase in anti-Islam attacks over the last few days on mosques and individuals, from gunshots to homemade bombs. But the events of the last few days have also shone a spotlight on the roots and nature of Islamic radicalization in Europe. French Prime Minister Manuel Valls addressed some of these concerns on Sunday. He says we're at war, but not at war against a religion, not against the civilization, but at war to defend our values, which are universal. He went on, it is a war against terrorism and radical Islam, against everything aimed at breaking solidarity, liberty and fraternity. While France's former Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin had some stinging criticism for Western nations following the attacks, he says the West has created Islamic terrorism and ISIL is the nasty boy of the arrogance of the West's policies. The Western intervention in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya and Mali has led to an increase in the number of the jihadists. This group reveals the real face of terrorism, and Muslims have nothing to do with these criminal acts. The West has to realize this sad reality that it helped create. Well, let's now get the thoughts of our guests on all of this. In Paris, we have Alain Gresh, a journalist for Le Monde Diplomatique and specialist on the Middle East. In Jerusalem, we're joined by Khalid Diab, journalist, writer and blogger. And also in Paris, we have Renaud Girard, chief foreign correspondent for Le Figaro. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Alain Gresh, let me start with you. Now, it was certainly an impressive show of unity that we saw in Sunday's marches, but marching for unity is one thing, and doing fundamental things that are going to change the situation on the ground are something else. And we heard the comments there from the various leaders. What do you make of it all?
Of course, I mean, the show of unity is something, because everybody, of course, condemned the attack on Charlie Hebdo. There is no voice to support it, and it's a wide agreement in the political force, the NGO, etc. But I think the real debate will begin tomorrow, after this. What are the reasons of this attack? What are the consequences? Is there a link between these attacks and the policy of France? Policy of France in the Middle East and in North Africa, the policy of France towards what we can call the French Muslim. This debate has already begun, but it's not. Everybody is waiting, of course, because today is a kind of national solidarity, even if there are some voices rising saying it's abnormal that, for example, Netanyahu be invited in such a demonstration, or the Prime Minister of Ali Bongo from Africa, who is a dictator, or others who are dictators, or even of Egypt, who attack freedom of press in Egypt and who come here to defend freedom of press. But the real debate, I think, will begin tomorrow.
Yeah, so where should this debate be going then? I mean, you brought up a number of questions there. Where do you think it should be going?
No, I think it should be a debate. Look, I heard the Prime Minister speaking about the war against terror. It has been 20 years since we are speaking of this war against terror. We are speaking of coordination of the European countries, of United States, of new laws, and you are taking new laws, etc., etc. And what is the result? The result is more terror and a chaos in the Middle East. So I think the first thing we should discuss is what is our policy in the Middle East and North Africa. And this is a real question. And I think really that the military intervention in general has brought something catastrophic to this region. To resume it, in 2003 there was no Qaeda in Iraq. 20 years after, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are among the main forces in Iraq. In some way, I mean the Western, by this military intervention, has helped to the development of these groups. So instead of speaking of security measure only, we should speak about policy. What is the policy of the Western world? What do we want to do with the Arab world? How are the relations with this? Until now, I think we don't have answer. It's very clear, for example, that in Iraq, France, United States, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and etc., have not the same aim in Iraq.
Khalid Diab, I mean, we saw in those marches on Sunday the diversity of people taking part in the marches. It's Muslims, Jews, white French people, a whole spectrum of different ethnic and religious groups, and that's certainly heartening to see. But there are still fundamental divisions within those groups. Where do you see all of this going? I mean, what are the hard conversations that need to take place here?
Well, I think one hard question, in fact, that needs to be confronted is that the world is not simple. It's complex, and that divisions within a so-called group are greater than the divisions between them. There are many people of various backgrounds and ethnicities who believe in freedom of expression, in tolerance, and there are people of those same backgrounds who don't believe in that. And so basically, for example, among the white mainstream of France, you have people who believe in tolerance and acceptance of the other, and you have people on the far right who don't. And you've got the same among the minorities too, like those who accept the values upon which the French Republic is built, and those who don't accept them. So I think that's one thing we need to confront. Another thing we need to confront is the simplistic us and them formula, like this whole thing about this idea that's has gained prominence over the past couple of decades, that there's a clash of civilizations. There is no clash of civilizations in my view. I think there is more of a clash within civilizations and between them, and there's a clash of interests.
I want to pick up on that point. I mean, the comments from the French Interior Minister and the Prime Minister saying that this is a war against radical Islam. Is that what you mean by this sort of us and them clash? Would you put that in that category?
Exactly, yes. I mean, you just need to look, for example, at all the protests in the Arab world against these attacks, all the journalists and cartoonists, for example, who have been expressing their solidarity with the slaughtered staff of Charlie Hebdo, to realize that it's not about this group versus that group. It's about one type of world outlook against another.
Renaud Giraud, where do you see all of this? I mean, if we look at the two gunmen, for example, in the Charlie Hebdo attack, who were second-generation French-Algerian brothers, reportedly went to the Middle East, became radicalized. What does this tell us then about French society? Is France now paying the price for not doing more to integrate Muslims into its society?
Yes, I mean, I think Alain Gresh had a point. to say that these external interventions, for instance, in Iraq in 2003, of course France was not part of it, but was part of Afghanistan, is quite of a paradox, because we have decided of our free will in the 50s and 60s decolonization. It means that it's not France or Britain who runs, it's not France who runs Syria anymore, it's not Britain who runs Iraq anymore. There is decolonization. So then we should not send our troops to put our order over there. But we should clean our own territory. And if we have people that came by immigration and that did not integrate in our society, does not believe in our values, number one, we have been very naive to accept them. Often they force their way to enter illegally on the French territory. And number two, we must do much more for education. And I was quite, actually, when Tony Blair started this war and made an agreement with George W. Bush to invade Iraq, it was quite weird for me, because he had at his in London what is called Londonistan, and I was always puzzled by the fact why he doesn't clean first Londonistan and then take care of Londonistan, if you like, and of this intolerance in Londonistan, and why does he go to make a war?
Why do you call it Londonistan?
Iraq, that he decided
just explain
not
that.
to rule anymore. Londonistan, I think that all the radical mosques that you have in London that were preaching, and a lot of these terrorists have been grown up in London, and you had these attacks in I think it was in 2005 in England, in London, that were done by homegrown Islamism from homegrown imams in mosques, not being in Iraq but being in London. So I think that it's true that it's a little bit the word is a little bit it's a little bit messy. I mean. We have a problem in what is amazing in France, that we have people who have been educated in France, who are helped by the state, who give them like often free education, free health, and often free lodging, and who hate the French state, and on top of that go and fight foreign wars in Syria, and come back with the weapons and the training to fight the French system, the French citizen, especially the Jewish community. So it's very serious, and we have to clean our own backyard, if you like.
I want to get Khalid Diab's view on some of what was just said there, and I want to ask you as well, Khalid. Obviously, France is a society, a very diverse society, lots of different groups, not just Muslims. There are Jews, Poles, Armenians, Turks, and so on. Many of them have been able to integrate into French society better than many Muslims. Why do you think that is? Do you think Muslims themselves need to do a better job of integrating?
Okay, before I tackle that point, can I just respond to a couple of the points just raised? Okay, well, there's a thing about, there's a lot that's pretty ahistorical about what was just said. For example, the point about voluntary decolonization. I think, a million dead Algerians would disagree with that description of France's policies in its former colonies when it left. As for the issue of rejecting French values, actually the parents and grandparents and even great-grandparents of the Muslims who are today in France fought for France, died in the trenches of World War I, died in World War II. A lot of them accepted French values. They were much more assimilated into French culture. But the second and third generation, some of them have moved away from this. And part of the reason for that, in my view, is a rejection of rejection. Mainstream society has vilified them, has stereotyped them, has marginalized them. They live in poor ghettos quite often. You know, they don't feel that their social or cultural identity is accepted in France. And also, ironically, a lot of them, in their quest for authenticity, also find that they're not accepted in their ancestral countries either. You know, like Algerians, French Algerians, or say French Moroccans and Belgian Moroccans, when they go back and visit their ancestral lands, they're often seen as foreigners there. So there's a search for identity amid rejection.
So what would you then tell? Sorry to interrupt, Khaled, but what would you then tell a young Muslim living in France who, like one of the ones you described, feels marginalized, disconnected from French society, and might be a future candidate for being radicalized in the future? What would be your solution for him?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult one, you know. But one thing I would try to, show and make clear to this young, hypothetical young French Muslim who's in danger of radicalization, is that he's not alone. There is a general intergenerational conflict at the moment that we see, in which, like, you know, there's huge unemployment, huge lack of prospects for young Europeans generally, and this is leading to a general radicalization of the population, young population. For example, you know, all the young white French and indigenous Europeans who are being drawn in increasing numbers to the far right. That's also, a byproduct of the sense of alienation from mainstream society, in which a baby boom generation has taken all the gains for itself and only left the crumbs for the millennial generation and so on.
All right. Well, these attacks have also kicked off a debate about free speech and identity. We're going to talk about that now a little bit. In the days after the attack, the phrase "Je suis Charlie" or "I am Charlie" became a rallying cry in solidarity with the writers at Charlie Hebdo, and it's been seen everywhere, on placards, on graffiti, as well as being shared millions of times on social media. But just as quickly came the response that "Je suis Charlie" didn't represent some people. This tweet, shared thousands of times, articulated that point for many. "I am not Charlie," it says. "I am Ahmed, the dead cop. Charlie ridiculed my faith and culture, and I died defending his right to do so. Je suis Ahmed." And in this cartoon, on the nature of satire, Joe Sacco says, though tweaking the noses of Muslims might be as permissible as it is now believed to be dangerous, it has never struck me as anything other than a vapid way to use the pen. He goes on to say satire is meant to cut to the bone, but whose bone? What exactly is the target? Now, Alain Gresh, I suppose it is a statement of our times that so much of this discussion has taken place on social media. But when freedom of expression collides with religious sensitivities, as in this case, where do you draw the line? Should you draw a line?
Yes, of course, we should draw a line. But let's be very clear. I mean, Charlie Hebdo has the right to publish what they want inside the French law. But we have the right to criticize them. I'm not Charlie because I have criticized them. I think their Islamophobic orientation. That doesn't mean that I accept, of course, the killing of people. But the people who claim the free speech should accept the fact that we can criticize Charlie Hebdo. And we can criticize the political positions they are taking, and saying they are taking political position which can be very dangerous. If we come to the question, for example, of the drawing of the Prophet, there is a difference. For my part, the law in France permits the publication of these drawings. As an editor-in-chief, as I was for Le Monde Diplomatique, I will never publish such things because I don't think it is useful. It's creating problems, it's creating tension in the society, and I don't think it is good to attack the part of the population in France which is the poorest, the weakest, and who has no many means to respond. And by doing this attack, I think we are feeding the idea among the Muslims that they are not part of our society, that they are ostracized, that we could attack them, etc., etc. But I want to make one just remark to return about the people who hate France among these people. There is, I think, 1,000, 1,500 people who are fighting in Syria and Iraq. And there is 6 million of Muslims. It's really a little minority. It's as if you said in the 19th century when there was all this anarchist movement, which was based mainly among the Italian migration, to say all the Italians are refusing the French value, they are all anarchists. No, it is really a small minority, and I think it's very wrong to say that they don't want to integrate. They have the same value, they are completely French, and they should be a part of our society.
Khalid Diab, how did you react initially to this Je suis Charlie campaign that was becoming very active on social media? Did it represent to you supporting what's seen as a magazine that frequently offends people, and you don't want that sort of association? Or is it more, we will defend people's right to free speech regardless?
Well, I personally, I think freedom of expression is sacred. I mean, you can defend someone's right to freedom of expression, but disagree with what they express. I think trying to limit or ban people's views, unless they are actually, inciting to hatred or to acts of violence, I think you should not limit people's freedom of expression, but you can call them out on what you think is bigoted, what you think is racist, what you think is unacceptable. But, religious sensibilities should not come into it. I mean, if someone of a certain faith finds a certain publication offensive, then they can just boycott it. But they can't ask for it to be banned. Because once you go down that road, where do you stop? I mean, you've got Muslims demanding, that, not publishing these prophet cartoons, but where do you stop? Do we then ban Dante's, Divine Comedy? And also, like, you've got Christians, Geert Wilders asking for the Quran to be banned. Where do you stop? In a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society, you have to accept everybody's freedom to express their views, but oppose those views if you find them unacceptable.
Renaud Giraud, what's your view on this? Where do you draw the lines?
And also, can I make one last point?
Just briefly, if you can, because our time is limited.
Yes, and also one thing that Muslims generally need to, bear in mind is that often in France and Western Europe at its worst, they enjoy more freedom of belief and freedom of expression than they would do in many Muslim countries and Arab countries.
Renaud Giraud, where do you see this debate as far as freedom of expression, and how far should it go?
I think that I don't agree at all what Alain Gresh said. I mean, I think that Charlie Hebdo was a satirical newspaper. We have this tradition in France for a long time of cartoonists, of satirical. They make fun of everything. They are not an Islamophobic newspaper. They are anti-religion. Okay. So personally, I am a Catholic and I'm proud of it. But then they criticize the Pope and so on, and they make. But I think they should have the right to do that. And if I don't want to buy Charlie Hebdo, I don't buy it. But I don't think that you could accuse them of being Islamophobic. They don't like religions, period. And they have the right to do so. The second thing that I don't accept, the link that is made between if you are poor, it's normal that you become a fanatic. No, I don't agree with that. Most of the 11th of September terrorists came from a bourgeois family. Right. Bin Laden was from a bourgeois family. We have a lot of immigrants in France who are Chinese, for instance, and we never had any problem of terrorism in Chinese. The answer is yes. We need a reform in Islam, because Christianity has reformed itself in the 16th century, and I think that the Islamic religion should have a reform, should be reformed.
Thank you very much, all of you. Alain Gresh, Khalid Diab, and Renaud Giraud. Thanks very much for your time. And that's it for another edition of Inside Story. Let us know your thoughts about this show or any other for that matter. You can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or contact us on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. I'm Hazem Seeker. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.